Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working in the county government's permitting department for about 7 years now, specifically handling drainage and floodplain enforcement. It started when I got a complaint from a homeowner about flooding issues. His property was in an unincorporated part of the county, while his neighbor's house was part of an incorporated village. The first homeowner was incredibly polite when explaining the situation. When I asked him about when he first noticed the flooding, he explained that it had started about 3 months ago, right after his neighbor had some work done on the property. He told me that now his yard would flood every time it rained, even if it was just a light shower. After taking a look around, I could see the problem immediately. The neighbor had filled his lot with extra soil, changing the natural drainage. I took some photos and measurements, then went to talk to the village inspector who had approved the work. I called about the property and mentioned the flooding complaints we'd received. The village inspector immediately got defensive, telling me that it was their jurisdiction and they could do whatever they wanted, and that I couldn't do anything about it. When I tried to explain that I could actually get involved if it was affecting county properties, he cut me off with a racist comment about those people just causing trouble. That last comment made my blood boil. I'd already heard from the first homeowner about some tension because he and his partner were a gay couple, and now the inspector was throwing in some racist comments too. Game on. I went back to investigate further, and that's when the entitled neighbor came storming out. He started yelling at me, demanding to know what I was doing on his property and insisting that I had no jurisdiction there. When I calmly explained that I did have jurisdiction due to the regulatory floodplain on his lot, he threatened to call the police. I pulled out my radio and offered to help him with that, calling dispatch myself to request both village and county units to my location. When the police arrived, the entitled neighbor and the inspector both started throwing fits. The inspector threatened to file a complaint with my supervisor about harassment. I simply invited him to do so, offering to quote the exact codes I was enforcing. While marking the floodplain boundaries with temporary marking chalk, the inspector tried to physically stop me and got some on his shoe. You'd think I'd painted his entire house orange from the way he reacted. I found 2 major violations: illegal fill in the floodplain and a shed built on that fill, both strictly against federal law. I sent out an official letter detailing the violations, which led to a meeting at my office. The entitled neighbor and the inspector showed up with steam practically coming out of their ears. The inspector immediately started shouting about abuse of power, but my supervisor quickly shut him down, confirming that everything was by the book. Our department head then gave them a simple choice: comply peacefully or face fines. Now here's where it gets good. The entitled neighbor had to apply for a new permit, which had to go through me. Did I follow every single regulation to the letter? Absolutely. Did I give him the usual helpful guidance we provide to most applicants? Nope. He filed wrong 3 times before getting it right, while his neighbor's permit sailed through with my assistance. After several weeks, the entitled neighbor complained about how ridiculous the process was taking. I simply explained that his application needed to be complete and correct, and that I couldn't approve anything that didn't meet all requirements. After 3 failed attempts, he finally got everything right. The first homeowner got to add fill to his property outside the floodplain to fix the drainage, and the entitled neighbor had to remove his illegal shed and fill. When they were leaving, the village inspector tried to threaten me, saying they would remember this. I coolly responded that I would also remember to thoroughly check every permit application from their village from now on. In the end, everything was resolved according to code. The first homeowner's yard stopped flooding, and the entitled neighbor learned that being a discriminatory jerk doesn't pay off when dealing with government employees who know their stuff. I'm 26 now, but when I was 15, I was diagnosed with bipolar schizophrenia. Let me tell you straight up, contrary to what movies and TV shows want you to believe, we're not all dangerous psychopaths waiting to snap. Most of us live perfectly normal lives with the right medication. The journey wasn't easy though. From ages 15 to 20, my doctors and I went through a real roller coaster trying to find the right balance of medications. There were lots of trial and error, adjustments, and some pretty rough patches, but eventually we got it right. For the past 6 years, I've been doing great. Just the occasional minor hiccup when my meds needed tweaking. This story takes place about 3 years ago when I had just moved into a new apartment. I was excited about the fresh start, and the rent was reasonable since I was sharing with two roommates. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags during the initial meeting, but I was desperate to find a place within my budget. My roommate seemed nice enough at first. The guy was a part-time DJ who worked at a record store, and the girl was a freelance artist who mostly spent her days sleeping and her nights at various parties. They were pretty open about their recreational drug use, which I didn't judge them for, but I kept my distance from that scene. When I first moved in, I made sure to tell them about my prescription medications and asked them not to enter my room without permission. The girl assured me they respected privacy here, but that turned out to be a lie. But actions speak louder than words. About 2 weeks after moving in, I noticed something was off with my pills. I keep careful count of my medications. I have to, since I take multiple types: antipsychotics, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety meds. These aren't your ordinary aspirin. They're strong medications that keep me stable and functioning. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I miscounted. But then it kept happening. Pills would go missing from different bottles. I knew it had to be them. They were the only ones with access to my room, and I'd sometimes overhear them talking about getting high off prescription meds. One evening, I finally gathered the courage to confront them about stealing my medication. They both immediately denied it. The guy acted offended at the mere suggestion, while the girl tried to gaslight me by suggesting I was probably just miscounting. When I insisted that I knew exactly how many pills I had and that they were definitely going missing, the guy had the nerve to tell me I should keep better track of my stuff. I even installed a lock on my door, but somehow they still got in. Maybe they had experience picking locks, or maybe the landlord gave them a spare key. I never found out, but I knew I had to do something. These weren't just any medications. Without them, I could become seriously unstable. That's when I had an idea. I take these super strong laxatives, sometimes because my regular meds can cause constipation. They're small and pink, and to someone who doesn't know better, they could easily be mistaken for something more recreational. One morning before work, I switched out the pills in one of my antipsychotic bottles with the laxatives. I made sure to keep my real meds in a secure place, then left for work. When I came home that evening, the apartment was unusually quiet except for some interesting sounds coming from both bathrooms. I called out to check if everything was okay. The girl shouted back through the bathroom door that it must have been some bad takeout. From the other bathroom, I could hear the guy moaning and begging for it to stop. They spent the entire night running between their rooms and the bathrooms. I've never heard such desperate sprints down the hallway. The next morning, they both called in sick to work. I made sure to rub it in by commenting about how terrible food poisoning can be and wishing them a speedy recovery, trying hard to hide my satisfaction. Needless to say, my medications never went missing again. They also became mysteriously much better at respecting personal boundaries. A month later, they both moved out, claiming the place didn't feel right anymore. I found better roommates, and now this story is just something I laugh about whenever I remember their rushing footsteps down the hallway that night. I've been working in information technology for quite a while, mainly at companies that provide tech support to other businesses. Recently, I landed a job as an IT engineer at a retail company. It seemed like a good opportunity since they were just starting to build their IT department. Before that, the human resources team was handling all the tech stuff, if you can believe it. Our team was pretty small, just 4 people. There was the general manager, his assistant manager, a senior engineer, and me. Being the new guy, I wasn't given much authority. My job was basically helping employees with their computer problems, while the senior engineer handled all the important stuff like servers and networks. Here's where it gets interesting. The senior engineer, despite his title, didn't really know much about managing servers or networks. His previous job was basically installing cables, nothing too technical. I, on the other hand, had years of experience managing complex systems from my previous jobs. One day, I noticed a senior engineer removing some crucial software from our servers. I tried to warn him about it. I explained that we needed the software for data processing and removing it would cause serious problems. He just brushed me off, telling me he knew what he was doing and to mind my own business. Since he wouldn't listen, I went to the general manager. Instead of helping, the general manager berated me, questioning who I thought I was. He said I should have helped the senior engineer instead of running to him with complaints, and that I wasn't being a team player. The server ended up being down for 3 days. When the company director asked for an explanation, I had to write a detailed report about what happened and how I fixed it. Instead of appreciating that I solved the problem, the general manager called me into his office. He gave me strict instructions to follow orders and not question my superiors. Because I had accessed the server without permission, he extended my probation period by 6 months. A few months later, something bigger happened. Our servers got hit with ransomware. Basically, hackers locked up all our data and demanded money. I noticed the problem early and sent messages to both the senior engineer and general manager, warning them about suspicious activity on our servers and emphasizing the need for quick action. Neither of them responded. Remember how I got in trouble last time for fixing things on my own? So this time, I did exactly what they wanted, nothing. For 2 weeks, they tried to fix it themselves. They failed miserably and told management that everything was lost. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly making weekly backups of our database from my computer. I couldn't access the server directly anymore, but I found a way to back up the data through a different route. The company was losing money every day because nothing was working. During an emergency management meeting, the general manager was trying to explain why everything was lost. He told everyone that the ransomware had destroyed everything and there was nothing they could do. Then our director turned to me and asked if I could fix this. The general manager tried to interrupt, dismissing me as just a new employee without the necessary skills. The director quickly shut him down, telling him to be quiet and let me speak. I explained that I could actually restore the system with data from a week ago because I've been making my own backups. The general manager's face turned bright red. When he demanded to know why I hadn't told him about these backups, I reminded him that he had specifically ordered me not to interfere with server issues, even extending my probation for trying to help last time. I was simply following his instructions. The director asked me to fix it. Within 4 hours, I had everything up and running again. The general manager tried to get me fired, claiming I had gone behind his back, but I had saved all our email conversations where he told me to stay out of server issues and stick to helping users with their computers. In the end, the general manager was fired for failing to implement proper security measures and backup procedures. The senior engineer was let go too. 6 years later, I'm still at the company, sitting in the general manager's old office doing his job, properly this time. That's what happens when you let ego get in the way of doing what's right. My uncle was always the black sheep of our family, in a good way. While everyone else was obsessed with status and appearances, he lived simply despite his wealth. He spent his retirement years volunteering at the local animal shelter, finding joy in giving abandoned pets a second chance at life. My cousin, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He'd always been the golden child who got everything handed to him on a silver platter. But somehow he still managed to blow through his trust fund by age 30. He'd been counting on inheriting my uncle's fortune to maintain his lavish lifestyle. When my uncle passed away last month, the family gathered for the will reading. My cousin showed up in his fancy car already planning how to spend his deserved inheritance. The lawyer cleared his throat and delivered the news. My uncle had left his entire $12 million estate to the animal shelter. My cousin immediately exploded in anger, demanding to know how everything could be left to what he called some mutts, insisting there must be a mistake. The lawyer calmly explained that the will was clear and that my uncle had been of sound mind when making his decision. My cousin grew even more furious, shouting about how he was the son and that flea bags couldn't inherit millions. He stormed out of the office that day, but that was just the beginning. A week later, I heard he'd shown up at the shelter claiming to be some long-lost volunteer coordinator who'd helped build the place from scratch. The shelter manager wasn't buying it. When confronted, the manager told my cousin that she'd been there for 15 years and had never seen him before. My cousin tried to argue that he had worked there before her time and had practically raised the animals himself. The manager shot him down quickly, pointing out that their record showed he'd never even adopted a pet from them, and threatened to call security if he didn't leave. But he didn't stop there. One night, he actually broke into the shelter and tried to rescue 6 puppies. His brilliant plan? To return them the next day and pose as a hero who'd saved them from terrible conditions. Unfortunately for him, the security cameras caught everything, including him tripping over his shoes while climbing through a window. When that failed, he hired some shady lawyer to forge documents claiming he was the true heir because my uncle had supposedly promised him the inheritance in some non-existent letter. The judge threw out the case in record time. In court, my cousin tried to present what he claimed was proof that his father wanted him to have everything, dramatically revealing a letter. The judge quickly pointed out that the letter was dated 2025, while my father had passed away in 2024. My cousin lamely tried to pass it off as a typo. Getting desperate, he went on local television to share his heartbreaking story about being cruelly disinherited. He actually cried on camera, sobbing about how the shelter had supposedly taken advantage of a vulnerable old man and turned him against his own son, claiming he was emotionally scarred. The shelter manager had a perfect response in a later interview, simply stating that during his father's 7 years of volunteering, his son had visited exactly 0 times and they had security footage of every single day. The grand finale was when he organized a protest outside the shelter. He'd hired people to hold signs saying, "Money for families, not fleas and children before cats." But what he didn't expect was the counter-protest that formed within hours. Hundreds of people showed up with their rescued pets. Many shared stories about how my uncle had helped them find their perfect companion. Former shelter animals who'd become therapy dogs, family pets, and even local celebrities all showed up with their owners. Someone projected the security footage of his failed puppy heist onto the shelter's wall for everyone to see. The sight of him face-planting while trying to climb through a window with puppies stuffed in his jacket went viral within hours. A peaceful protester called him out, asking if that was him doing a belly flop in the security video. My cousin tried to claim it was doctored footage. Even a small child got involved, asking their mother why the man was trying to steal puppies like Cruella de Vil. He tried to salvage his dignity by claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. The shelter ended up receiving even more donations after the whole fiasco, and they used part of their inheritance to build a new wing named after my uncle. My cousin had to sell his fancy car to pay his legal fees. He moved to another state, probably to escape the endless stream of people asking him to recreate his famous security camera tumble. The shelter even framed a still from that footage. They call it their failed heist Hall of Fame. The shelter now has an annual adoption event called Second Chances, where they waive all adoption fees. They say it's to honor my uncle's belief that everyone deserves another shot at happiness. Well, almost everyone. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.